morning. Welcome to the Sunday morning service of Open Door Bible Church in West Glossop. Today we are in Proverbs 25. Now this gets to be kind of a unique portion of Proverbs. These are all Proverbs that Solomon wrote, but when Solomon put together the book of Proverbs, these weren't in it. These were added, and we'll read about that this morning. Now, Solomon wrote over 3,000 Proverbs. Relax, I'm not going to preach all 3,000. But he wrote 3,000 Proverbs. That's a bunch of writing. All right, verse 1. These also are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied. So this collection, which really runs from Proverbs chapter 25, verse 1, through Proverbs chapter 29, verse 27. So 5 chapters of the book of Proverbs were written by Solomon, but they were added some 270 years later by Hezekiah, king of Judah. Now, King Hezekiah of Judah reigned over the nation at a time of spiritual, here's one of my favorite words, revival. This was in a good time. He added these chapters to the previous collection of Proverbs, having found these yet to be published Proverbs of Solomon. So, somewhere in cleaning at the temple, at the palace, someplace, they found more Proverbs that Solomon wrote. They added them to the book. All right, verses 2 through 5. It is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, so the heart of the king is unsearchable. Take away the dross from silver, and he will go to the silversmith for jewelry. Take away the wicked from before the king, and his throne will be established in righteousness. Now let's kind of take that apart verse by verse. Verse 2, it is the glory of God to conceal a matter. There are many mysteries in the universe, both material and spiritual. There are many things God has concealed, and this is one expression of his glory. It is one of God's ways to say. But here's what this really says to us. You are amazed by what you see, yet what you don't see, what I have concealed, is even greater. Now, that's going to be part of the thrill of being with Jesus, is we're going to get to know things that we don't know now. We're going to get to understand stuff that we don't understand now. And I'm looking forward to that. I got a whole list of questions for you. Now, tells you God's glory is to hide things. The glory of kings is to search out a matter. It is the glory of great men, specifically kings, to search out what God has concealed. This speaks to our pursuit of God's mysteries in the spiritual world, but even more so God's mysteries in the material world. When men and women seek out scientific knowledge, when they try to understand the mystery and brilliance of what God has concealed in his creation, they express an aspect of the glory of God. We ought to be saying to scientists, keep looking, keep understanding, keep learning, because everything you learn is going to teach you about God. Now, verse 2 is apparently a tribute to both Solomon and Hezekiah, who were both scholar kings. Now, things worked different in their day than it does in our day. In the time of Solomon and Hezekiah, the world of academics and the world of government were tied together very closely. That's not true anymore, but it used to be true in those days. All right, verse 3. As the heavens for height and the earth for depth, as the sky extends to apparently limitless heights above the surface of the earth. With reference to the depth emphasizes the apparently limitless extent of the earth below our feet. It's a vast place that God has made. It now says, so the heart of the king is unsearchable. Well, it's part of the glory of kings to search out a matter. One thing every man has trouble searching out is his own heart. We have trouble figuring out what makes us tick. We have trouble some days figuring out why we do the things we do. God understands it. God knows us. And you know, God knows every single detail about us, and he loves us anyway. That amazes me on some days, that God knows all about me, and he still loves me. All right, verse 4. Take away the dross from silver. You cannot have pure silver until it has been purified. No nation can have a king that is a public blessing until all the wickedness has been taken out. By the way, this is not just taking the wickedness out of the king's heart. It's taking out the wickedness of the people who surround him and give him advice. I wish I could go to Washington and replace all those people giving our president advice. There's folks telling our president abortion's okay. There's folks telling our president this week, right now, don't sell Israel replacements for the missiles that go in the Iron Dome defense system. Right now, there are guys saying, cut those off. Don't send any more. He's getting bad advice from folks whose hearts are not pure. I don't want to change the president. I just want to go and change the folks who are giving him advice. That's what this is talking about. Listen to verse 5. Take away the wicked man from before the king. That's what I like to do. I like to go get all these wicked guys. Now, we have a term for all those guys collectively. It's the swamp. I want to drain the swamp. I want to get the bugs out of the swamp. I want to get them out of government. I like to see righteousness reestablished in our government. How'd you get me off on that? I was being so nice this morning. Verses 6 and 7. Do not exalt yourself in the presence of the king, and do not stand in the place of the great. For it is better that he say to you, come up here, than that you should be put lower in the presence of the prince, whom your eyes have seen. Now, obviously this is talking about pride. This is talking about self-exaltation. God hates pride. We got to do everything in our power to stay humble, to have a low opinion of ourselves. We don't want to be that guy that walks into the banquet hall, looks around, and makes a beeline for the front chair in the front row. We want to be the guy sitting in the back row when the man in charge comes and says, come up front, rather than sitting up front and being told, go sit in the back. So when we properly humble ourselves before God and rulers, we will be invited up to a higher place. Jesus talked about that. Jesus in Luke chapter 14 talks about, for whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And it says that happens in the presence of the prince. Now, if we're concerned about what happens before an earthly prince or a king, how much more should we be concerned with our behavior before God Almighty? Because God sees everything that we do. Not only does he see everything we do, he knows what our motives are for doing it. So, this isn't something we can fake. This is something we can pretend. This has to be real. All right. Verses 8 through 10. Do not go hastily to court, for what will you do in the end when your neighbor has put you to shame? Debate your case with your neighbor, and do not disclose the secret to another, lest he who hears it expose your shame, and your reputation be ruined. Now, there is a place for courts. Courts are a place for justice. I got to tell you, I spend a fair amount of time in court, and none of it is good. None of it is uplifting. I would avoid court at all costs. I would. And that's really what it's saying here. Now, sometimes it's necessary, but if there's any way to resolve something without going to court, that's what we want to do. Jesus in Luke chapter 12 says, yes, and why even of yourselves do you not judge what is right? When you go with your adversary to the magistrate, make every effort along the way to settle with him, lest he drag you to the judge deliver you to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I tell you, you shall not depart from there till you have paid the very last mite. Now, this was in the days of debtor's prison. When you owed a bill, they would put you in jail till you paid the bill. Now, nobody thought this through real well. How do you pay a bill when you're in jail? How do you make any money? I mean, this was a flawed system from the beginning, but it was the system. It talks in our verse about when your neighbor has put you to shame. Now, there's always two sides to every story. We are always convinced our side is the right side. It isn't always the right side. You have no idea the percentage of people who go to court feeling that they're going to win, spending lots of money so they can win, and they lose. It's a lot. Avoid court at all costs. Solomon tells us in verse 9, debate your case with your neighbor. What's Solomon saying in today's English? Settle it out of court. Don't go to court. Stay in control. All right, the rest of this chapter is going to be one or two verse Proverbs. Where there's two of them, I'll give them to you together. But we're going to go through and let each one kind of stand on its own and talk about it a little bit. So 11 and 12 kind of go together. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. That sounds elegant, doesn't it? It just sounds nice. Verse 12, like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise rebuker to an obedient ear. So let's do the first one. This is one that we hear used all the time. Apples of gold in a setting of silver. There is something special and powerful about a word that is properly spoken. The term they use here is fitly. Let's use properly because we don't ever use fitly anymore. But the right word at the right time has power to heal, power to strengthen, power to guide, and power to rescue. So here he paints this word picture, this right word. It's like an apple of gold in a setting of silver. He continues this idea of gold in the next verse. Like an earring of gold and an ornament of fine gold is a wise rebuker to an obedient ear. So verse 12 takes two ingredients. It takes a wise rebuker, somebody who cares enough about you to come and point out your problem, and it takes a person who is willing to receive rebuke and benefit from it. Now, oftentimes, somebody will go and offer advice and it will be rejected. Sometimes it is violently rejected. Not everybody likes to be told they're wrong. Folks, let me help you. We're all wrong most of the time. So when somebody tries to come to you and point out a problem, listen to them. They are trying to help you. They are not trying to hurt you. People don't take correction well. We need to learn to do that. We need to learn to receive it with a right spirit. Now, oftentimes God will put somebody in your life to just come and kind of tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, can I share something with you? Maybe you're not aware of how you're coming across. Don't blow those people off. Listen to them. It's entirely possible God sent them because you need them. All right, I'm going to read the next verse through. It's not going to make sense to you, but it's okay. We'll work our way through it. All right. And listen to the words and get the timing. Like the cold of snow in time of harvest is a faithful messenger to those who send him, for he refreshes the soul of his masters. Now, harvest time, whether we're harvesting here in New England or we're harvesting in Israel, is snow during the harvest a good thing? By the way, does it snow during the harvest? No. What is he talking about? I got to give you some culture, some insight into how they did things. All right, so like the cold of snow in a time of harvest. Man, I can picture the guy out there, picking the crops and he's shivering because it's snowing on him. This speaks of a cold drink cooled by the cold of snow given to a hard-working man in time of harvest. That sounds better. The refreshing, invigorating nature of that cold drink illustrates the blessing of a faithful messenger to those who send him. The faithful messenger is beloved by the one who sends the message. By the way, we're all supposed to be faithful messengers. Now, the reference here is to a drink that is cooled by snow. Now, how do I do that in Israel? Well, very much like we used to do it in New England. So remember in New England, now none of you are old enough to have been there, but you've seen pictures, you've heard stories. Guys go out and cut blocks of ice with a saw, and they stick them in an ice house. So that when summer comes, you've got ice. They did much the same thing. They would go up into the mountains, they would gather snow, they would gather ice. Now, they didn't have sawdust like we used here. They would use jute, which was like a rope, hay woven together for insulation. And they cut these blocks of snow and ice, wrap them up in insulation, and bring them down and store them in a cave. And you could go in and keep your beverages in there and keep them cold. And you could take this cold drink out to the guy working in the field, and he would be refreshed and thankful. Now does the verse make sense? Okay, we have to do this little bit of, filling in. This verse is not saying that it's going to snow during harvest. That would be a disaster. But it does say he refreshes the souls of his master. So the sender of the message is refreshed and comforted, knowing the message is being faithfully delivered. What's my analogy? God is pleased with faithful messengers today. Folks, we all got a job. We're messengers. We're carriers of the good news. You're not going to be a pastor to be a carrier of the good news. You got to know that Jesus loves you and tell all the folks about it. That makes you a carrier of the good news. All right, verse 14. Now the standalone one. Whoever falsely boasts of giving is like clouds and wind without rain. So this is talking about a guy. You would find this guy in a church. He's a guy bragging about how much he gives to the church, except he doesn't give anything. Kind of reminds you of the story of Ananias and Sapphira. They lied about what they gave. Some folks just want to be known as givers, but they don't want to give. Now, what are they like? It says they're like clouds and wind without rain. Now, this was written in Israel. Not written here. In Israel, in the days that this was written, there was no irrigation. Now, if it didn't rain, the crops didn't grow, and you starved to death. The guy in Israel praying for rain was praying with real urgency. Now, in the United States, when we have a bad summer, farmer prays for rain, waits till the next day, doesn't rain, he goes down to the stream and turns on the pump and pumps the water up. Didn't really pray real high because he knew he had plan B. These guys had no plan B. God didn't send the rain, crops died. Now, your crops are dying. It clouds over. The wind starts to blow. You're absolutely, positively sure rain is coming. And the clouds and the wind go by and not a drop of rain. You get the picture of this guy who's now really bummed out because I thought it was going to rain and it didn't, and the crops are dying and the animals are thirsty. You got to put yourself in the position of these people. By the way, Jude in his little short letter used the same kind of an analogy. Clouds without rain. All right, verse 15. By long forbearance a ruler is persuaded, but a gentle tongue breaks a bone. Now, I'm pretty sure nobody has used the word forbearance in a sentence this year. So it's talking about patience. It's talking about, here's a word we all hate, long suffering. That's for more than 4 hours. All right? Now, one of the things we have trouble with is, 1, self-control, and 2 is patience. But if we can learn to have self-control and patience, we can accomplish great things. Anybody recognize the name William Wilberforce? He was the guy in Britain that got slavery outlawed. Former slave owner. He went to Parliament year after year after year to talk about slavery. And eventually he got slavery outlawed in Great Britain because he had patience. The second part of the verse says, a gentle tongue can break a bone. The patient, gentle words of a wise man or woman can have a great impact over a long period of time. Such words can have bone-breaking power. Never underestimate the timid little lady that prays. She's powerful. All right, verse 16. For all you people with a sweet tooth. Have you found honey? Eat only as much as you need. Now this gets graphic. Lest you be filled with it and vomit. Right? Don't overdo. Don't be a pig. Only take what you need. Now, in Israel, when this was written, there wasn't a lot of candy. There wasn't a lot of sweets. There were no candy shops. The sweetest thing they had was honey. That's why this is something that people would respond to. So, if you have honey, only have a little bit. Don't overdo it. No matter what good thing there is out there, we should not overindulge in it. I'm going to be nice. I'm not going to say anything to hurt anybody's feelings. Just don't overindulge in it, whatever it happens to be in your life. It might be chocolate cake. It might be red hot dogs. It might be something else. Whatever it is, don't overdo it. Gluttony is a sin. We had a lady in this church once tell me I never preached on the sin of gluttony. Pay attention. Gluttony is a sin.
Yeah.
Don't do it. See, I've now preached on gluttony. All right. Verse 17. Seldom set foot in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you and hate you. It's pretty practical advice. Stay out of your neighbor's house. Now, it is expected that neighbors would visit neighbors, but such hospitality should not be abused. When you do that, it says he becomes weary of you and hates you. No, only go over and see your neighbor once in a great while. Don't be hanging out there every day. He's got work to do. He's got stuff to do. He's sitting there thinking, when is this person going to leave? Because I got stuff I got to do. And he doesn't want to be rude and say, would you please go home? That's what he's thinking. So, you got the idea? Don't wear your neighbor out. All right, verses 18 and 19, they go together. A man who bears false witness against his neighbors is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble is like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. All right, so many proverbs speak against the man who bears false witness. This is a person who lies, whether in court or in common conversation. He does great damage. He is like a club, a sword, and a sharp arrow. It is a sin to lie. Let me do that again. It is a sin to lie. Now, we convince ourselves often that it's okay to lie because we don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. That is not true. That is a lie. It is never right to lie. Now, it could be that you go to your mother-in-law's house for dinner. And mother-in-law is a lousy cook. And mother-in-law makes you dinner, and it's terrible. And on the way out the door, she says, "Did you like the dinner?" And you're looking at the mother-in-law, you're looking at the wife, you're figuring out, what are you going to say? Do not tell her it was a great meal. You can, however, say, that was very unusual. I appreciate the effort you put into that meal. But tell the truth. Don't tell a lie. One lie leads to another lie, it leads to another lie, leads to lying just becoming a way of life. I can't imagine being a police officer, pulling somebody over, and you know whatever they tell you next is a lie, because they just don't want to get a ticket. I mean, I can't imagine the poor cop who goes up to the person's window, knocks on it, the person rolls the window down and says, "I'm sorry, I was speeding." It's always an excuse. Don't be like that. Just tell the truth. All right? Second part, verse 19. Confidence in an unfaithful man in time of trouble. It's like a bad tooth and a foot out of joint. You know when your foot snapped and you can't get it back where it belongs and it hurts to walk on it? That's what it's like. Somebody you would depend on and they let you down. Don't be that person. All right, verse 20. Like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. All right, we got to explain that one. All right, so starts off, one who takes away a garment in cold weather. Some people and their actions are especially troublesome. Know anybody like that? They bring discomfort, like taking away your coat in cold weather. It talks about vinegar and soda. The picture is, nobody here has ever done vinegar and soda. It's like putting Mellows in a can of soda and watching it explode everywhere. It's that kind of reaction it's talking about. Those kind of things are like a person who sings songs to somebody with a heavy heart. You don't go into a wake and start singing Beatles songs. That's the picture. Be sensitive. Be kind. Be understanding. Don't be irritating. Understand what people are going through. Understand that everybody has feelings. This is just about being sensitive to people. That's a good thing for us to do. We learn to need to be sensitive. One of the things I often say to folks at funerals or at wakes is, I hope I never get good at this. I don't want to have to go to enough of them that I get good and professional at it. I want to always be able to, empathize and say, I'm sorry for your loss, and really mean it. All right, verses 21 and 22. If your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. If he is thirsty, give him water to drink. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head, and the Lord will reward you. Now, some of you all you got was, let's put coals of fire on somebody's head. Let's back up. Let's get the whole intent. All right. God expects us to take care of people. God expects us to go out of our way to help people. So just because somebody is my enemy is not a reason for me not to help them if they are in trouble. So if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. The Bible commands us to have love and care for our enemy. Human nature would tell us to hate our enemy, but the Bible tells us to love them. Matthew talked about that. Paul quoted this in Romans 12. It's a principle. We want to go out of our way to do something for our enemy. Now, what's our motivation? Our motivation is, number one, to please God, and number two, to try to win our enemy over. All right, verse 22. For so you will heap coals of fire on his head. Not literally. Don't do that. It's the idea that this enemy that you've now helped is going to have this burning conviction because of your kindness in their life. Now, the following came out of my commentary that I was studying this from, and I thought this was great. It says, notice we can destroy our enemy by making them our friend. That's the best way to deal with an enemy. Make them your friend. Go out of your way and do something for them they wouldn't expect, that they'll be blown away by. That they'll be saying, why would he do that for me? I'm always rotten to him. Why was he nice to me? Start talking to themselves. Oh, and by the way, it says, and the Lord will reward you. Remember my memory verse? Sowing and reaping? This is sowing and reaping. Verse 23, we're back to the weather. The north wind brings forth rain, and a backbiting tongue, and angry countenance. Okay, backbiting is saying bad things about people, normally behind their back. Okay? It's talking about people. It's damaging their reputation. We ought not to do that. Now, does that happen in churches? It does, unless you take corrective action. So here is the corrective action. When somebody comes to you and wants to tell you something bad about somebody else in the church, stop them and say, wait a minute, I really want to hear this, but let's go get the other person and include them in the conversation. That will be the last time they come to you to tell you something bad. They will go find somebody else to dump on. Don't allow people to put garbage into your ears. You control that. Stop it. Yeah, chances are it isn't true. But even if it is, the minute you want to go get the other person, it will solve the problem. They will have a change of heart and they will want to go and talk to somebody else. Let's not let that happen in church. And it does happen in churches. By the way, this is one of those things that we can make religious. So let me tell you how we do backbiting in a religious way. We get in a group prayer meeting and we pray about somebody's sins who aren't there. Dear Lord, help Bill who has such a lousy temper. Ever been to one of those prayer meetings? I have. Okay, so we just make it religious. Don't do it there either. God already knows. You don't have to tell anybody else. Just knock it off. All right, verse 24. It is better to dwell in the corner of a housetop than any house shared with a contentious woman. Now, lest I beat up all the wives in the audience, this applies equally to men. All right? It's hard to live with somebody who's always griping and complaining. It's better to live up on the roof in the rain with the pigeons than to live like that. That applies to anybody. Go home and fix it. Right? We don't need hostile speech. We don't need grief. Home is supposed to be heaven on earth. Some more than others. So that's just a word of warning. Be nice at home. Be good to the person you live with. All right, verse 25. As cold water to a weary soul, so is good news from a far country. Okay. Before I explain this, let me put you in the reference. This is pre-telephone, pre-telegraph, pre-internet, pre-email. You know, where we get a message from one place to another, or somebody walked with it, rode with it, or rode a boat with it. Okay? So there's some effort involved here. So we get the part about cold water being refreshing. We're out in the heat, we're working, we're sweating. Somebody brings us a nice cold drink, boy, it's good for us. It says that's like good news from a far country. Now, words are important. This isn't good news from next door. This isn't good news from the next town. This is good news from a far country. Somebody traveled a long way to bring you this message. They exerted effort. Okay? The message is that much more important. It is that much more significant because it came from this great distance and great effort was put into delivering the message. We're supposed to be like that. By the way, there's somebody you know that you need to share Jesus with who doesn't live nearby. Write them, call them, communicate with them. The fact that you cared from a long distance often has more effect than somebody next door telling you. There is a distance factor. It's a real thing. That's what this verse is saying. So, somebody pops into your head as I said that. Well, I'm going to do something about it. All right, verse 26. A righteous man who falters before the wicked is like a murky spring and a polluted well. Sound appetizing? Yeah. All right. Now, sometimes we stumble. Sometimes we falter because we're human. It's always worse when we do that in front of the wicked so they can say, look, that guy's a Christian. He's not so hot. He can do any better than I am. The devil just loves that. Right? Satan loves to just bring all those things to somebody's attention. You know, we're going to make mistakes. It's okay. Just open it and move on. By the way, when you see somebody else make a mistake, don't jump all over them. Pray for them. Don't go grab them and shake them and say, you're a Christian, you can do better than that. They already know they blew it. They don't need you telling them they blew it. They need you saying, hey, I know you're having a hard time, I'm going to pray for you. Is there something I can do to help? You want to talk. Don't kick somebody when they're down. Anybody can do that. Let's take the high road. I don't want to be like a murky spring and a polluted well. That's just yucky. All right, verse 27. We're back to honey again. It is not good to eat much honey. So to seek one's own glory is not glory. So we already talked about not eating too much honey. But now we're going to get this word picture that eating too much honey is like the guy, again, we wouldn't today say to seek one's own glory is not glory. We talk about somebody tooting their own horn. That's probably a more proper way to say it today. If you're going to go around telling folks how great you are, chances are you're not. Chances are there's a problem. So, again, what is it saying? Be humble. Don't let God exalt you. Don't you do it. Pride is a sin. Pride's what caused Satan to fall from heaven. He brought it down here and shared it with all of us. Be careful about pride. The Bible says God hates pride. I don't want to do anything that God hates. All right, verse 28. Whoever has no rule over his own spirit is like a city broken down without walls. This is another verse on self-control. Folks, do you realize how little self-control goes on in America? If we had self-control, we wouldn't have road rage, for example. We wouldn't have all these arguments and fights and drive-by shootings. Nobody can control their temper. Nobody can control their anger. Nobody can control their emotions and their desires. Yeah, we're Christians. We're supposed to have self-control. We're supposed to be able to, in the words of this verse, have rule over our own spirits. If it feels good, it's not a reason to do it. If you're not supposed to do it, don't do it, whether it feels good or not. So this person who has no self-control is your word picture. Is like a city broken down without walls. Now, in those days, the only thing you had to defend your city was the wall you built around it. If you didn't have a wall, you didn't have any defense. Now, you guys are reading through the Old Testament with me. What do we do when we attack someplace? We tore the wall down. What do we do when the enemy was coming? We built the wall up. Walls were important. Walls were a big deal in those days. That's what they had. So the picture is, if you can't control yourself, you're like the city without a wall. You have no defense. There is nothing to save you. So we need to have self-control. And you have made it to the end of Proverbs chapter 25. For those of you who are watching, thank you for joining us today. Come visit us at Open Door Bible Church, West Hastily, New Hampshire, right next to McDonald's. If you would like to participate with us in our work of supporting missionaries around the globe, please go to our website, GODBC. That's shorthand for the Open Door Bible Church.org, and click on the donate button. Thank you very much, and God bless you.